Starting today, this is our place. Strangers can scram.
Whoa, hold on a minute. What's going on with both of you?
After my mother's funeral had just ended, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law began to insult me non-stop. My husband intervened, but the two of them showed no signs of slowing down. You're being tricked. Maybe you've been brainwashed or something? Haha. That's right. It's all because your mom spoiled you. She's the one who raised you to be this way. Your mom's to blame. When my sister-in-law and mother-in-law badmouthed my mother, my anger exploded. I can tolerate them speaking ill of me, but I absolutely will not tolerate them speaking ill of my deceased mother. My name is Kathy, 35 years old. I met my husband David, who is a year older than me, at work, and we got married 5 years ago. I used to live with my mother and husband. Reflecting back, a lot has happened in these past 5 years. 5 years ago, I was working at the real estate company my father owned. I've always been interested in the flow of people and money, so I studied economics in college and applied that knowledge to my work. However, there were those who saw my success as a result of my own ability, and those who thought it was due to my parents' influence. For example, when I heard people talking about me, they often referred to me as the boss's daughter, rather than by my name. Moreover, my husband was the top salesperson in the same company. It seems that he was popular with many women, and I received nasty glances from various people. Of course, I don't think that all of my work success is due to my own efforts. I believe it's all thanks to the cooperation of those around me. But I couldn't help but feel frustrated at being labeled as the boss's daughter. While I was living these frustrating days, my father passed away. My brother took over as president, and the harsh stares towards me became even more severe.
You must have screwed up. That's why your brother's now the president. Now we'll have to call you the president's sister, right? Haha.
Normally, I might just feel frustrated, but at that time, I had just lost my real father. Those words were hard to take for me, who was mentally worn out. After my father's funeral, a single thought crossed my mind. What do I really want to do? Even if I tried to keep going in this situation, something inspirational was missing. As I thought about it, I found myself saying, I want to be an investor in front of my husband. David, rather than rejecting my outrageous proposal, supported me. When I told my mom that I wanted to quit my job and become an investor, she laughed and said, You didn't have to worry about your father. You should have done what you loved from the start. Despite my father's recent death, this might seem outrageous. Before talking to my mother, I was always thinking about the negatives. But looking at my mother's smile, I began to feel that the opinions of others didn't matter. While dealing with the funeral, settling the estate, moving, and other busy tasks, I started as an investor. Of course, not everything went smoothly from the beginning, but my calm and cheerful husband and mother encouraged me every step of the way. Thanks to both of them, the investments I started with my savings and my father's inheritance went well. After a few years, my income had significantly increased compared to when I was working at the company. On the one hand, I was living a fulfilling life, but on the other hand, there were two people who were a big concern: my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. My sister-in-law is 3 years older than my husband, 4 years older than me, and she's still unmarried. From the time that David and I decided to get married, I got the feeling she wasn't particularly pleased. Even my mother-in-law seemed to think that I was just a rich little daddy's girl, despite the fact that I was working at the same level as any other employee, even though my father was the CEO. Every time I went to my in-laws, she'd make snide comments when my husband or father-in-law weren't around. Being a pampered princess, I bet you can't do housework worth a dime. It's a woman's job to do the chores. Please don't make David do it. Mother-in-law, my own mother taught me a lot, so I can handle things on my own. But since I'm also working, David and I help each other out. It was his idea, actually. But there was no way my mother-in-law would accept that. Even my sister-in-law was often aggravated in my presence, saying things like, "It's absurd that a woman who makes her husband do housework can get married." My relationship with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law only got worse when my father-in-law passed away.
It must be nice, huh? Living off David's money and slacking off at home? I have to put up with so much because my husband's gone. Why is it that you get to live so freely, Kathy?
Mother-in-law, as I've told you before, I make a living as an investor. I'm not slacking off at all. In fact, I have less free time than when I was working a regular job.
If you're really making a living, at least give me an allowance. You can't even have kids. You're really a good-for-nothing wife.
With the death of my father-in-law, my mother-in-law became more fixated on money. She seemed to resent the fact that I, whom she considered a shut-in, didn't seem to be in financial distress, despite the fact that I had become less active outside the home as I continued my work as an investor. But that didn't mean I was thinking of giving my mother-in-law money. She claimed to be putting up with a lot, but every time I went to the in-laws, there were more and more luxury items. It was clear where the money would go if I gave it to her. I loved David, who didn't doubt people and didn't do anything to be doubted himself, so I had decided not to tell him about my in-laws. There was one time, however, that I confided in my own mother. Why can't I have children? The uncertainty looming as I approached 35 and the constant questions from my mother-in-law about, "When will you have a baby?" got to me. Her words calling me good for nothing wouldn't leave my mind, and I ended up letting it out. But my mother just looked puzzled at my outburst.
"Well, I had you when I was 35, so it's okay. God will give us the right timing, I'm sure."
Her words lightened my heart. Since then, even when my mother-in-law mentioned children, I was able to reassure myself children are a gift. Now, after these tumultuous 5 years, things are finally starting to calm down. Then, suddenly, my mother passed away. She had a subarachnoid hemorrhage. Losing my mother, who has always been my beacon of light, plunged me into grief. David, who had lived with me for several years, seemed to be taking it pretty hard too, though he was kind and supportive. The funeral took place before we had fully come to terms with my mother's absence. Many people came to the funeral of my mother, who had worked as an executive at the company my brother took charge of, even after my father passed away. Among them were my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. It seemed they had timed it for when David was away from his seat.
"There's no need for condolences, right?"
Without even offering condolences, they started signing the register. I was simply dumbfounded at the insensitivity of my in-laws. And yet, when David returned, my in-laws changed their demeanor in an instant.
"You may be going through a tough time, but Kathy's shock is probably greater. You should support her,"
they would say, as if they were considering my feelings. Later, when I was deeply feeling the exhaustion from the past busy few days, the doorbell rang at home. My husband, considerate as he is, answered the door to find my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. Due to David's kind nature, he thought they must have come to cheer me up. David invited the two in without any hesitation. As my mother-in-law and sister-in-law entered the living room, they glanced at me and drew an unpleasant curve on their mouths. And then they uttered words beyond my expectation.
"From today, this is our home. Outsiders should leave."
Mom? David exclaimed in surprise. But my mother-in-law didn't stop talking.
"Until now, we've put up with you because your mom was here. But now, only unemployed Kathy is left. If you are parasitized by such a woman, you will be ruined. We'll live together with you, so you should divorce Kathy."
What are you saying, Mom? At a time like this? And what do you mean by unemployed? I've told you many times that Kathy is an investor.
When you say investor, it sounds like she has a proper job. But essentially, isn't she just playing around, buying and selling stocks? I wonder how such a woman can be a wife. You can find a much better wife.
Hold on a minute. What do you mean by bad-mouthing Kathy? What do you two intend to say? Kathy earns her own money. Don't call it playing around.
You're being fooled. You've been together with Kathy's mother all the time. Haven't you been brainwashed? Haha.
That's right. Kathy has become like this because her mom spoiled her. I understand why David wants to defend Kathy. After all, it's her mom's fault for raising Kathy like this.
When my sister-in-law and mother-in-law badmouthed my mom, my anger, which had been lethargic until a moment ago, exploded. I can bear with them badmouthing me, but I will never tolerate them badmouthing my mom. Stop speaking ill of my deceased mother. I expressed my anger to its full extent and glared at my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. However, both of them were grinning, showing no signs of fear.
Okay, I get it. You don't like us speaking ill of your mom, huh? Haha. Now that the mom who has always sided with you and let you be a shut-in is gone, it must be hard for you to hear the truth.
I looked down to see my clenched fist trembling. In order to suppress my own outburst, I took a deep breath, and just as I was about to retort, David, not me, was the one who spoke first.
Enough is enough, Mom. Don't speak ill of Kathy or my mother-in-law. Kathy is not a shut-in. She's a bona fide investor. My mother-in-law and I have been cheering for Kathy's efforts all along. If Kathy was just playing around, neither my mother-in-law nor I would have allowed it.
Even my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, and certainly I, couldn't hide our surprise at the usually calm David's low voice. As for my mother-in-law, she seemed unable to digest the situation and began to hastily make excuses.
Don't be so angry. Even so, the life Kathy led so far was possible because of your earnings, right? Didn't you let her live a privileged life to the point of buying such a high-rise condo? Poor David. If you live with us, we'll do all the housework. Just give us a small allowance, that's all we need. The rest is...
Don't you know, Mom?
David interrupted my mother-in-law's words, speaking in a flustered voice.
This apartment is Kathy's.
What?
At David's words, my mother-in-law let out an absurd cry. Unable to hide her surprise, she started to fact-check with her eyes wide open.
This apartment is Kathy's? Didn't you buy it?
When did I ever say that? This apartment is a legacy from my father-in-law, and Kathy got it. That's why the title, of course, is Kathy's. Plus, we split the living expenses evenly. I don't know what you guys are thinking, but Kathy earns more than I do.
What?
Not only my mother-in-law, but even my sister-in-law were surprised by David's confession. No wonder. They couldn't have imagined that I was earning more than David. My mother-in-law lost her momentum at David's words and became like a corpse. Taking over for my defeated mother-in-law, my sister-in-law opened her mouth. That can't be. Investors make that much. Making more money than working for a company just by buying and selling as an individual?
I don't know about other investors. It might just be that Kathy has a good sense for it. But facts are facts. And yet, how dare you belittle my precious wife? This is our home? Don't kid me. Both of you, get out now.
At David's words, my sister-in-law began to panic. What? Wait a minute. We sold our house thinking we could live here from today. What? Now it was my turn, along with my husband, to let out a cry of surprise.
You sold our house? Why all of a sudden? At least you could have consulted with me.
We thought we could live here. Besides, we didn't have money. I quit my job thinking you would support me. So if you don't let us live here, we'll be in trouble. Hey, Mom, say something. While looking at David with pleading eyes, my sister-in-law shook her mother, who had become like a corpse. However, perhaps the shock was too great, and my mother-in-law was in a daze. My sister-in-law, who had lost her confidence, clung to me this time. Hey, Kathy, I'm sorry.
I apologize. Please persuade David for me. We can't survive like this.
You said you sold your house, which means you have a considerable amount of money at hand, don't you? To the clinging sister-in-law, I said coldly. At that, the sister-in-law began to flip out at me.
Don't get smart. Don't talk back. Just because your investments went well, don't get carried away.
Enough is enough.
David raised his voice, which echoed far more than the sister-in-law's scream. Towards the sister-in-law, who closed her mouth at that voice, David directed a sharp gaze.
Forget about the house. I won't even ask for my share, so just get out of here right now.
Saying that, my husband practically forced his mother and sister out of the house and locked the door. For a while, we could hear the sound of the doorbell and the pounding on the door, but after a while, it became quiet. After that, according to relatives, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law seemed to have rented a cheap apartment and started living together. My in-laws' house, which was situated in a remote area, couldn't be sold for a high price, and the land was cheap too. My sister-in-law couldn't manage to get a decent job, and their money quickly ran out. Still not learning their lesson, they had tried to rely on me and David several times, but of course, we turned them away at the door. They had sold all the branded goods they owned, and now I hear they are barely making ends meet by working part-time jobs from morning till night. Meanwhile, I've been able to live freely as an investor without anyone around to make nasty comments. And next year, we're planning to add one more member to our family, just as my mother had said. I was thankful to her once again for being blessed at just the right time.